Montana Territory, 1872. The wild frontier stretched like a hungry beast across the horizon, its teeth the jagged mountains that rose against the darkening sky. For 26-year-old Ryder Fullerton, this unforgiving land had been both salvation and prison. The relentless wind carried his horse's hoofbeats across the empty plains as he rode toward the ranch that had employed him these past 3 years. "No room for softness out here," he muttered, adjusting his worn Stetson against the setting sun. The words had become something of a prayer, repeated so often they had carved themselves into the bedrock of his beliefs. Men who opened their hearts on the frontier ended up with arrows in them, or bullets, or knives. Ryder had witnessed enough death to know that survival depended on solitude. Connections meant vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities meant death. Beneath his light stubble and sun-bronzed features, Ryder's face remained a study in careful neutrality. Even at the bunkhouse, among the other hands who rode for the Diamond K, he maintained a respectful distance. They were good men, loyal cowhands who'd fight alongside him, but none had breached the walls he'd built around himself after Antietam. The war had taught him that bonds formed quickly often broke just as fast, usually with the wet sound of metal piercing flesh. What Ryder wanted was simple: earn enough money to claim his own piece of this vast territory, build a cabin far from others, and live by his own rules. Independence, that was the dream that kept him pushing through long cattle drives and brutal winters. A life where he answered to no one, where no one's suffering could touch him again. As the ranch buildings came into view, Foreman Jenkins intercepted him, hat in hand, never a good sign. "Fullerton. Need you to make a supply run to Helena tomorrow, the usual order plus these." He thrust a list into Ryder's gloved hand. "Old man Kincaid's got his niece visiting from back east. Guess she needs woman things." Ryder's jaw tightened. Town meant people, complications, and the distinct possibility of trouble, but arguing with Jenkins was pointless. "Yes, sir," he replied, tucking the paper into his shirt pocket. "First light. Earlier if you can manage it. 3-day ride there and back if you push hard." 3 days away from the quiet predictability of ranch work. 3 days of watching his back in settlements where a man's life was worth less than the price of cheap whiskey. But there was comfort in the danger. It reinforced what he already knew about the world. No point hoping for anything better. That night, as the other hands played cards and shared stories, Ryder cleaned his Remington by lamplight, preparing for the journey. Their laughter washed over him like distant thunder, familiar but separate from his existence. Sometimes, in moments like these, a hollow feeling expanded in his chest, not quite pain, not quite longing, but an awareness of something missing. He pushed it away, focusing on the mechanical precision of his task. The frontier was no place for a tender heart. Ryder had learned that lesson well, and he intended to keep it. Dawn had barely kissed the eastern sky when Ryder departed, the supply wagon creaking beneath him as he guided the team toward Helena. The list in his pocket included the usual ranch supplies: salt, coffee, ammunition, and tools, but also unfamiliar items like hairpins and writing paper. He wondered idly what kind of woman would choose to visit this harsh territory. Probably some fragile eastern flower who'd wilt at the first sign of hardship. His first day's journey passed uneventfully, camping beside a creek as twilight descended. The second morning broke with ominous clouds building on the horizon. By mid-afternoon, rain lashed the plains, turning the trail to mud that sucked at the wagon wheels. Ryder urged the team forward, knowing shelter was still hours away. The storm intensified, lightning cracking across the sky with such ferocity that the horses reared in panic. As Ryder fought to control them, a bolt struck a nearby tree, sending a branch crashing down. The team bolted, dragging the wagon at a dangerous angle. He managed to turn them away from a ravine, but the wagon wheel hit a boulder, splintering with a sound like gunfire. Cursing, he brought the terrified animals to a halt. The wagon listed dramatically, its axle broken beyond his ability to repair on the trail. Nightfall was approaching, the temperature dropping, and the nearest way station was still miles ahead. With no choice but to continue on horseback, Ryder transferred essential supplies to his saddlebags, secured the wagon as best he could, and mounted his gelding, leading one of the draft horses. He'd have to return for the wagon once the storm passed. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle by the time he spotted lamplight in the distance. Relief washed through him as he approached the way station, a sturdy log structure that served as post office, general store, and overnight lodging for travelers along the Helena Trail. Dismounting with stiff limbs, Ryder led his horses to the small stable attached to the main building. As he pushed open the door to the station, warmth and the smell of coffee enveloped him. The proprietor, a grizzled man named Wilson, looked up from behind a rough-hewn counter. "Evening, cowboy, rough night to be traveling." "Wagon broke an axle about 5 miles back," Ryder explained, removing his dripping hat. "Need a place to wait out the storm." "Got one room left," Wilson replied. 5 cents for the night, includes breakfast." As Ryder reached for his coin purse, the door to the back room opened, and a young woman emerged carrying a steaming pot. She moved toward the wood stove, her back to him as she set down her burden. When she turned, Ryder found himself unexpectedly transfixed. She couldn't have been more than 22, with hair the color of chestnuts that fell in soft waves past her shoulders. Her eyes, a clear blue like mountain lakes, widened slightly at the sight of him standing there, water pooling at his feet. "Oh," she exclaimed, "I didn't realize we had another guest." Her voice carried a trace of an Eastern accent but lacked the affected quality he'd expected. Wilson nodded toward her. "This here's Ruby Ellsworth, helping out while her pa recovers from a fall. Ruby, this fella just lost his wagon to the storm." Ryder managed a stiff nod, uncomfortable with the way she studied him with frank curiosity. There was something unsettling about her direct gaze, as though she could see past the mud and trail dust to something underneath he preferred to keep hidden. "You must be freezing," she observed, pouring coffee into a tin mug without waiting for his response. "This should help." Their fingers brushed as she handed him the cup, and Ryder withdrew his hand as if burned, nearly spilling the hot liquid. Ruby raised an eyebrow but said nothing, turning back to her tasks. "Stew's still warm if you're hungry," Wilson offered. "Ruby makes it better than my wife ever did, God rest her soul." The meal was indeed better than the trail fare Ryder was accustomed to, rich with venison and root vegetables. He ate quickly, aware of Ruby moving about the room, tending to the few other travelers who had sought shelter from the storm. There was an efficiency to her movements, a practical competence that surprised him. She didn't flinch at the crude language of the stagecoach driver, nor did she simper and flutter like town women often did around men. Later, as Ryder sat cleaning mud from his boots by the fire, Ruby approached with a blanket. "For your room," she explained. "The nights get cold even in summer." "Thank you, Miss Ellsworth," he replied formally, accepting the offering. She didn't immediately move away as expected. Instead, she settled onto a nearby bench, smoothing her simple blue dress. "Where are you headed, mister?" "Fullerton, Ryder Fullerton, Diamond K Ranch." "Ah, near Fort Ellis, isn't it? I passed through there on my way to my father's place." Surprised that she knew the territory, Ryder found himself asking, "You're not just visiting then?" A shadow crossed her face. "I came when word reached Boston that my father had been injured in a mining accident. The doctor says he'll recover, but someone needs to manage things until then." "A mining claim is dangerous business for a woman alone," Ryder observed, immediately regretting the words when her expression hardened. "I've managed dangerous business before, Mr. Fullerton." Her tone was cool but not angry. "The wilderness doesn't discriminate, it tries to kill men and women with equal enthusiasm." The unexpected response drew a reluctant smile from him. "Fair enough." A crack of thunder shook the building, causing the lamps to flicker. Ruby didn't flinch, simply glancing toward the window where rain lashed against the glass. "Will your wagon be safe until morning?" she asked. "Nothing worth stealing, and what's valuable I brought with me." He paused, curiosity getting the better of him. How does a Boston woman end up in Montana territory? Ruby's fingers twisted the fabric of her dress, the first sign of nervousness he'd observed in her. "My mother died when I was 16. Father couldn't bear to stay in our home afterward, so he headed west. I remained with my aunt to finish school." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "But we're family." "When he needed me, there was no question of coming." There was something in her straightforward declaration that made Ryder uneasy, a simple loyalty that challenged his carefully constructed worldview. In his experience, people ultimately chose self-preservation over attachment. Most Eastern women wouldn't trade Boston society for a mining camp, he noted. Her lips curved slightly. "Perhaps I was never suited for Boston society in the first place." Standing, she added, "Your room is the last door on the left. Sleep well, Mr. Fullerton." As she walked away, Ryder found himself watching her longer than propriety allowed, struck by the contradiction she presented. There was a softness to her, certainly, in the way she spoke and the gentle curves of her figure. But beneath it lay something unexpectedly resilient, a strength he hadn't anticipated. The realization troubled him as he retired to his small room. Ruby Ellsworth didn't fit neatly into his understanding of the world, where people were either predators or prey, where connections were liabilities rather than assets. He fell asleep to the sound of rain on the roof and dreamed, for the first time in years, of something other than solitude. Morning broke clear and cold, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Ryder rose early, intending to assess the damage to his wagon before the way station filled with other travelers. To his surprise, Ruby was already in the main room, stoking the fire. She wore a practical riding outfit, split skirt and fitted jacket, with her hair braided back from her face. "You're up with the sun," he commented, reaching for his hat. "Habit," she replied, straightening. "Father always said daylight's too precious to waste in these parts." "Smart man." He'd appreciate hearing that from someone other than his daughter. She gestured to a pot on the stove. "Coffee." Ryder hesitated, then nodded. "I need to check on my wagon, see if I can salvage it." Ruby poured him a cup, then reached for her own hat, a sensible felt affair rather than the decorative bonnets favored by town women. "I'm heading that direction myself. My father's claim is beyond where you said your wagon broke down." Alarm flared through him. "It's not safe for you to ride alone." Her eyebrow arched in that now familiar expression of challenge. "I've been making this ride weekly since I arrived. Besides, I'll have you for company, won't I?" Before he could form an objection, she continued, "Unless you'd prefer solitude." "I wouldn't want to impose." Put that way, refusing her company would seem churlish. Ryder found himself in the unusual position of being outmaneuvered by someone he'd underestimated. No imposition, he managed. "But the trail's muddy after the storm." "Hence the riding clothes," she smiled, a quick flash that transformed her face. "I didn't pack my Boston finery for Montana's mud season." An hour later, they rode side by side along the rain-washed trail. Ruby sat her horse with the easy confidence of someone who'd spent considerable time in the saddle. She didn't chatter like he'd feared, instead remaining comfortably silent as they picked their way around puddles and fallen branches. When they reached his abandoned wagon, Ryder dismounted to inspect the damage. The broken axle was worse than he'd initially thought, the wheel itself splintered beyond repair. "I'll need to bring back tools, maybe another wagon to salvage what's left," he concluded, straightening. Ruby, who had remained mounted, nodded thoughtfully. "My father has a spare wagon at our camp. It's not much, but it might get you back to your ranch." Ryder stiffened. "I couldn't accept." "It's not charity, Mr. Fullerton, it's practicality." She gestured to the sky, where clouds were beginning to gather again. "Another storm's brewing. If you don't get these supplies to wherever they're going, I suspect someone will be mighty disappointed." He thought of the ranch, of Jenkins expecting his return, and of the ranch owner's niece waiting for her woman things. Swallowing his pride, he nodded. "I'd be grateful for the loan. I'll make sure it's returned." "Good, it's only a mile further to our camp." She turned her horse toward a trail that branched eastward, coming. The mining camp was smaller than Ryder had expected, just a handful of rough cabins clustered near a stream where sluice boxes stood ready for use. A bearded man sat whittling on the porch of the largest cabin, his leg propped up on a stool. "That's my father," Ruby explained as they approached. "Samuel Ellsworth, Boston banker turned gold prospector." Samuel looked up as they rode in, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Ruby, girl. Didn't expect you back so soon." His gaze shifted to Ryder, instantly wary, and with company no less. Ruby dismounted gracefully, crossing to kiss her father's cheek. "This is Mr. Fullerton from the Diamond K. His wagon broke down on the trail during last night's storm. I thought we might lend him the old Conestoga to get his supplies to the ranch." Samuel's sharp eyes assessed Ryder, who remained uncomfortably aware that he was being measured against some unknown standard. "Diamond K's a respectable outfit," he finally said. "You Jenkins's man." "Yes, sir, Foreman sent me for supplies." Ryder removed his hat respectfully. "Your daughter's offer is generous. I'd ensure the wagon's safe return." The older man's expression softened slightly. "Any friend of Ruby's is welcome here." He gestured to a bench. "Sit, share our noon meal before you load up." "I should get back." Nonsense, Samuel interrupted. Storm's going to hit again within the hour. You might as well wait it out here rather than get caught in the open. Ruby shot Ryder a look that clearly advised against arguing. I'll start lunch while you show Mr. Fullerton where we keep the wagon. Over the next hour, Ryder found himself drawn into the Ellsworth's world despite his instinct to maintain distance. Samuel, once assured Ryder wasn't a claim jumper, proved to be a natural storyteller, recounting his journey from respected banker to fortune seeker with self-deprecating humor. Lost my wife, lost my purpose back east, he explained as they ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread. Figured I'd either find a new life out here or die trying. Might have been the latter if Ruby hadn't shown up when she did. Ruby's cheeks colored slightly. Father exaggerates. The doctor had already set his leg before I arrived. Said it poorly, Samuel countered. You're the one who realized it wasn't healing right and made him fix it. The easy affection between them stirred something uncomfortable in Ryder's chest. Their relationship contradicted everything he believed about frontier life, that connections were weaknesses, that self-reliance was the only path to survival. Yet here was Samuel, who clearly would have died without his daughter's intervention, and Ruby, who had abandoned a comfortable life to care for her father. You're welcome to stay until the weather clears, Ruby offered as raindrops began to patter on the cabin roof. We have space. Ryder stood, suddenly needing air despite the approaching storm. I appreciate the offer, but I should load the wagon. The ranch is expecting me. Outside, he busied himself transferring supplies from his damaged wagon to the Ellsworth's spare Conestoga. The work kept his hands occupied while his mind churned with unwelcome thoughts. Ruby followed, holding an oilcloth over her head against the increasing rain. You're determined to ride into the storm, I see, she observed, helping him secure a crate of ammunition. Better to face it head-on than wait for it to find you, he replied, not looking at her. Is that your philosophy for everything, Mr. Fullerton? The question, asked without judgment, still felt like an accusation. Ryder paused, rain streaming from the brim of his hat. It served me well enough. Ruby stepped closer, still sheltered under her makeshift umbrella. Has it? You seem like a man running from something rather than toward it. Irritation flashed through him. You don't know me, Miss Ellsworth. No, she agreed calmly, but I recognized the look. I saw it in my father's eyes for years after my mother died, like the world had nothing left to offer but pain, so better not to engage with it at all. The accuracy of her assessment left him momentarily speechless. Thunder rolled across the sky, closer now, and lightning illuminated her face in brief, brilliant flashes. This storm is getting worse, he finally said, changing the subject. I should go. Ruby studied him for a long moment, then nodded. At least take this. She handed him the oilcloth. It's not much, but it might keep you somewhat dry. Their fingers brushed again during the exchange, and this time Ryder didn't pull away so quickly. Thank you for everything. Safe travels, Mr. Fullerton, she said softly. I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for out there. As he drove the borrowed wagon through sheets of rain, Ryder tried to dismiss Ruby Ellsworth from his thoughts. She was nothing to him, just a chance encounter, a brief intersection of separate paths, yet her words echoed in his mind, challenging the foundation of beliefs he'd built his life upon. Was he running rather than moving forward? The question unsettled him more than he cared to admit. The journey back to the Diamond K took longer than expected, the storm washing out sections of trail and forcing detours. By the time Ryder delivered the supplies 3 days later, Jenkins was nearly frantic. Thought you'd been ambushed by road agents, the foreman grumbled, helping unload the wagon. Old man Kincaid's niece has been asking about our things daily. Wagon broke an axle in the storm, Ryder explained. Had to borrow this one from a mining camp to get back. Well, you're here now. Take the ladies' packages up to the main house, would you? I've got men waiting for these tools. Reluctantly, Ryder gathered the parcels marked for the ranch owner's niece and headed toward the imposing 2-story house that overlooked the ranch yard. He'd rarely had occasion to visit the main house, preferring the simple camaraderie of the bunkhouse to the formality of the owner's domain. A housemaid answered his knock, taking the packages with a brief thanks. Relieved to have completed his errand without having to make conversation with the Eastern visitor, Ryder turned to leave, only to freeze at the sound of a familiar voice. Mr. Fullerton. Ruby Ellsworth stood in the doorway, her expression as surprised as his own must have been. She wore a dress of pale yellow that complemented her chestnut hair, which was arranged more formally than when he'd last seen her. "Miss Ellsworth," he managed, confusion evident in his voice. "What are you doing here?" "I might ask you the same question," she replied, stepping onto the porch, "though I suppose the answer is obvious now." "You work for my uncle." "Your uncle?" "Thomas Kincaid," she gestured toward the house. "My mother was his sister." The revelation left Ryder momentarily speechless. Of all the possibilities, finding Ruby installed as the ranch owner's niece had never occurred to him. "Jenkins said you were visiting from back east," he finally said. "I was at my father's camp." She smiled slightly. "Uncle Thomas insisted I stay here while father recovers, rather than at the mining camp. Said it wasn't proper for a young woman alone." "But you weren't alone. Your father is currently unable to protect my virtue with his broken leg," she finished wryly. "Uncle Thomas is old-fashioned that way." Ryder shifted uncomfortably, aware they were standing in full view of anyone passing by. "I should let you get back to your packages." Ruby stepped forward before he could retreat. "I never thanked you properly for returning father's wagon." "One of the hands will bring it back to your father's claim next week," he assured her. "That's not what I meant." Her blue eyes held his steadily. "Father told me after you left that you refused payment for the delivery of our monthly supplies. That you added them to your own load without being asked." Ryder shrugged, embarrassed. "Seemed the least I could do, given the loan of the wagon." Still, it was thoughtful. She paused, then added, "Uncle Thomas is hosting a small gathering tomorrow evening. Some neighbors from nearby ranches. Would you consider attending?" The invitation caught him completely off guard. Cowboys weren't typically included in the social events of ranch owners. "I don't think that would be appropriate, Miss Ellsworth." "Because you work for my uncle," she raised an eyebrow. "I specifically asked him to extend the invitation to you. He agreed quite readily when I explained how you helped father and me." Put that way, refusing might seem like an insult to his employer. Ryder found himself trapped by courtesy and Ruby's calm expectation. "If Mr. Kincaid has no objection, then, thank you." Ruby's smile widened, transforming her face in a way that made something twist in Ryder's chest. "Wonderful, 8 o'clock tomorrow evening." As he walked back to the bunkhouse, Ryder wondered what he'd gotten himself into. Social gatherings had never been his strength, even before the war. The thought of making small talk with the territory's landowners while wearing his second-best shirt struck him as a particular form of torture. Yet he found himself anticipating seeing Ruby again, a dangerous indulgence he couldn't quite suppress. The next evening found Ryder standing uncomfortably in Kincaid's parlor, nursing a glass of whiskey and trying to blend into the wallpaper. He'd borrowed a clean shirt from another hand and polished his boots to a respectable shine, but still felt conspicuously out of place among the ranchers and their wives in their Sunday best. Ruby's entrance changed the energy of the room. She wore a dress of deep blue that emphasized the clarity of her eyes and the warm tones of her hair. Several young men immediately gravitated toward her, including the son of a neighboring rancher who positioned himself possessively at her side. Ryder told himself the flare of irritation he felt was merely discomfort at the social setting, not jealousy. He just decided to make his excuses and leave when Ruby spotted him across the room. Her face brightened as she made her way toward him, skillfully disengaging from her admirer. "You came," she said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I wasn't entirely sure you would." "Your uncle is my employer," Ryder replied stiffly. "It would be impolite to refuse." "Is that the only reason?" Her direct question caught him off guard, as did the subtle challenge in her eyes. Before he could formulate a response, Thomas Kincaid approached, clapping Ryder on the shoulder with surprising familiarity. "Fullerton, Ruby's been singing your praises. Says you saved her father from starvation by delivering his supplies." "It was nothing, sir," Ryder protested, uncomfortable with the exaggeration. "Not according to her," Kincaid lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Between you and me, Samuel Ellsworth is too stubborn for his own good, refusing my help all these years, insisting on making his own way. At least he had the sense to send for Ruby when things got bad." Ruby's cheeks colored slightly. "Uncle Thomas exaggerates. Father's claim is proving quite promising." Not promising enough to keep him from breaking his leg and nearly dying alone in that godforsaken camp, Kincaid retorted, though his tone remained affectionate. Mark my words, Fullerton, the man will come to his senses eventually and move into town, especially now that Ruby's here to talk sense into him. The conversation shifted to other matters, with Kincaid introducing Ryder to several prominent ranchers as the man who saved my brother-in-law's bacon. Each time, Ryder attempted to downplay his role, but found his protests waved away with good-natured dismissal. Later, as musicians set up for dancing in the cleared dining room, Ruby found him again, her eyes bright with barely suppressed amusement. "You look like you're contemplating escape," she observed, nodding toward the door he'd been eyeing. "I'm not much for parties," he admitted. "Neither am I, to be honest. In Boston, social gatherings were excruciating, all those people judging your every word and gesture." She sighed. "I'd hoped the frontier would be different." "Isn't it?" "The scenery's changed, but people remain the same." She nodded toward a group of young women watching them with undisguised curiosity. "They're wondering what the ranch owner's niece is doing talking to a cowhand, instead of accepting Timothy Bradshaw's offer to dance." Ryder glanced at the young rancher who had been at Ruby's side earlier, now glowering at them from across the room. "Perhaps you should. Bradshaw's father owns the largest spread north of here. Good match for a woman looking to settle in the territory." Ruby's expression cooled. "Are all cowboys such authorities on suitable marriages, or is that a specialty of yours, Mr. Fullerton? I only meant—" "I know what you meant," she straightened, smoothing her skirts. "You think I came to Montana to find a husband, that I'm some fortune hunter looking to secure my future through matrimony." "That's not what I said," Ryder protested, aware they were drawing attention. "But it's what you believe, isn't it, that a woman alone must be desperate for male protection?" Her voice remained conversational despite the challenging words, that were all just waiting to be rescued. Discomfort tightened Ryder's chest. "I don't claim to understand women's motivations, Miss Ellsworth." "No, you don't," she sighed, her anger seeming to dissolve as quickly as it had appeared. "I came here for my father, Mr. Fullerton, just as I told you at the way station. Not for a husband, not for security, not for anything but family, the one connection that matters." The music began, a lively reel that drew couples to the center of the room. Ruby glanced toward the dancers, then back at Ryder. "Dance with me," she said suddenly. "I don't dance," he replied automatically. "Neither do I particularly well." She held out her hand. "But I'd rather stumble through a reel with you than glide perfectly with Timothy Bradshaw." The simple honesty of her statement disarmed him. Almost against his will, Ryder found himself taking her hand and leading her to join the forming sets. The dance was indeed a disaster. Ruby stepped on his toes twice, and Ryder nearly collided with another couple during a complicated turn. But by the end, they were both laughing, the earlier tension forgotten in the shared ridiculousness of their attempt. "We're terrible," Ruby declared as they left the floor, flushed and breathless. "Absolutely dreadful," Ryder agreed, surprising himself with his own smile. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the wall Ryder maintained between himself and others felt less like protection and more like an unnecessary barrier. Ruby's laughter, the warmth of her hand in his during the dance, the way she looked at him as if truly seeing him, all created hairline fractures in his carefully constructed isolation. The revelation was terrifying. "I should go," he said abruptly. "Early start tomorrow." Ruby's smile faded, confusion replacing it. "Of course. Thank you for the dance, Mr. Fullerton." Ryder nodded stiffly and made his escape, ignoring Kincaid's invitation to stay for another drink. Outside, the cool night air cleared his head somewhat, but didn't erase the unsettling awareness that something fundamental had shifted. For 3 days, Ryder threw himself into the most demanding ranch tasks, volunteering for fence repair and breaking green horses, anything to exhaust his body and quiet his mind. The strategy worked only partially. Even as muscles protested and new bruises formed, thoughts of Ruby intruded. On the 4th day, Jenkins found him mucking stalls, a task usually assigned to the youngest hands. "Got another errand for you, Fullerton," the foreman announced. "Need you to escort Miss Ellsworth to her father's claim." Ryder straightened, pitchfork in hand. "Kincaid's letting her go back." "Not permanently." "She's just checking on things, bringing supplies." Jenkins shrugged. "Apparently she's been pestering him daily. Man finally gave in to get some peace." Can't someone else take her? The question came out more sharply than intended. Jenkins raised an eyebrow. Problem. No, sir, Ryder replied quickly, just asking. Kincaid specifically requested you, said his niece trusts you. The foreman eyed him curiously. Something I should know about. No, sir. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning. Pack for a few days. Storms brewing again might delay your return. Jenkins turned to go, then paused. Fullerton, the boss thinks highly of you. Don't do anything stupid. The warning was clear if unnecessary. Whatever inexplicable pull Ruby Ellsworth exerted, Ryder had no intention of acting on it. She was the ranch owner's niece, a Boston-educated lady with prospects far beyond a saddle tramp with nightmares. When Ruby met him at the stables the next morning, she wore her practical riding clothes and a reserved expression that matched his own. Mr. Fullerton, she greeted him formally, thank you for accompanying me. Miss Ellsworth, he helped her mount, careful to maintain a proper distance. Your uncle says we should reach your father's claim by nightfall if we make good time. The journey began in uncomfortable silence, both of them seemingly determined to keep conversation to a minimum. Only when they stopped to rest the horses at midday did Ruby finally break the stalemate. Have I offended you in some way? She asked directly, sitting across from him on a fallen log. Ryder looked up from his coffee, startled by the question. No, why would you think that? You've barely spoken 10 words since we left the ranch, and at the gathering you left so suddenly. She studied him intently. If I've misunderstood our acquaintance, I'd prefer you say so plainly. Put on the spot, Ryder struggled to articulate feelings he himself didn't fully understand. It's not that, he sighed, setting down his cup. Miss Ellsworth, I'm a cowhand, you're the boss's niece. There are expectations, boundaries. Is that all? She looked almost relieved. I thought perhaps you found me too forward or disagreeable. No, he said quickly. You're neither of those things. Ruby smiled slightly. Well, I'm certainly forward by Boston standards. My aunt was forever despairing over my direct manner. It's refreshing, Ryder admitted. Out here, people don't usually say what they mean. Then perhaps you could return the favor and tell me what you're really thinking. Her gaze held his steadily. Because I don't believe this is simply about my uncle or your position. The directness of her challenge left no room for evasion. Ryder found himself speaking more honestly than he had in years. Being around you makes me uncomfortable. Hurt flashed across her face, quickly controlled. I see. Not in the way you're thinking, he hastened to add. It's uncomfortable because it makes me question things I've believed for a very long time, about people, about connections. Understanding dawned in her eyes, the walls you've built. Yes, he looked away, unable to maintain eye contact while exposing such vulnerability. After the war, I decided it was safer not to get close to anyone. Safer emotionally, you challenge that. Because of my father, she guessed, because you see that connection as a strength rather than a weakness. Ryder nodded slowly, and because when I'm with you, I start to wonder if I've been wrong. If what I've been calling self-reliance is really just fear. The admission hung between them, raw and honest in a way Ryder had never allowed himself to be since Antietam. He expected Ruby to offer platitudes or, worse, pity. Instead, she moved to sit beside him on his log. After my mother died, she said quietly, I was so angry at my father for leaving, for choosing the frontier over staying with me. I decided I didn't need anyone, that I would build my life without depending on a single soul. She glanced at him, a sad smile playing at her lips. I was very good at it, excellent in fact. When Father's letter came, my first instinct was to ignore it, to punish him for abandoning me by abandoning him in return. What changed your mind? Ryder asked, genuinely curious. I realized the person I was really punishing was myself. Ruby's fingers twisted together in her lap. By refusing connection, I wasn't protecting myself from pain, I was guaranteeing it. A different kind of pain, but pain nonetheless. The insight struck Ryder with unexpected force. Wasn't that exactly what he'd been doing, choosing the certain loneliness of isolation over the potential hurt of attachment? It's not easy, he said finally, changing what you believe. No, Ruby agreed, but sometimes necessary. She stood, brushing dust from her skirt. We should continue if we want to reach Father's claim before dark. As they resumed their journey, the atmosphere between them had transformed. Ryder found himself sharing stories he'd never told anyone, about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his brief time at university before the war called him away, the nightmares that still woke him sweating and shaking. Ruby listened without judgment, occasionally offering insights from her own experiences. By the time they reached Samuel Ellsworth's claim, Ryder felt as though he'd known her for years rather than days. Samuel welcomed them with genuine warmth, his health visibly improved since Ryder's last visit. The small cabin seemed transformed by Ruby's previous stay. Curtains hung at the windows, a braided rug covered the rough floorboards, and shelves held books and small decorative items that softened the frontier austerity. "Place looks like a proper home now," Ryder observed as they settled around the table for an evening meal. Samuel nodded proudly. "Ruby's got her mother's touch. Margaret could make a palace out of a pigsty." "Hardly a palace," Ruby protested, though she looked pleased. "Just small comforts." "Comfort's nothing to scoff at out here," her father replied. "Too many men live like animals because they've forgotten what civilization feels like." The comment, though not directed at him specifically, made Ryder uncomfortably aware of his own Spartan existence. His bunk at the ranch and the small pack he carried on drives contained only necessities. No books, no mementos, nothing that spoke of personality or permanence. Had he been merely surviving rather than living all these years? The question lingered as night fell and conversation turned to the claim's prospects. Samuel had struck a promising vein just before his accident, and now that he could move about on crutches, he was eager to resume work. "I could stay a few days," Ruby suggested. "Help you get started again." "Nonsense," her father replied firmly. "Your uncle would have my hide. Besides, I've hired a boy from town to assist with the heavy work until my leg's fully healed." "Still," Ruby persisted, "I worry about you alone out here." Samuel's expression softened. "I know you do, girl, but I've lived the solitary life longer than you have." "I'm used to it." "Being used to something doesn't make it right," she countered, glancing briefly at Ryder. The exchange resonated uncomfortably with Ryder's earlier thoughts. He excused himself to check on the horses, needing space to process the conflicting emotions Ruby and her father stirred in him. Outside, the night air carried the scent of approaching rain. Clouds obscured the stars, and in the distance, thunder rumbled, another storm moving in, just as Jenkins had predicted. Ryder secured the horses in the small lean-to stable, ensuring they had water and feed for the night. When he returned to the cabin, Ruby was settling blankets on a narrow cot while Samuel banked the fire. "You can take my room," she told Ryder. "I'll sleep out here." "I couldn't possibly." "Nonsense," she interrupted. "You're the guest." "Thought I was the escort," he countered with a hint of humor. Ruby smiled. "That too, either way I insist." Too tired to argue, Ryder acquiesced, retreating to the small room that bore unmistakable signs of Ruby's occupation. A silver-backed hairbrush on a makeshift table, a shawl draped over a chair, the faint scent of lavender lingering in the air. Sleep came surprisingly easily, perhaps because of the day's long ride or the unexpectedly comfortable bed. Ryder drifted off to the sound of rain beginning to patter on the roof, without the usual anxious thoughts that typically preceded his nightmares. He woke suddenly in the darkness, disoriented and uncertain what had disturbed him. Then he heard it again, a cry from the main room, barely audible over the now pounding rain. Moving quietly, Ryder opened the door to find Ruby sitting upright on her cot, eyes wide and unseeing. "Miss Ellsworth," he whispered, not wanting to wake Samuel, who snored softly in the corner. She didn't respond, her breathing rapid and shallow. Recognizing the signs of a nightmare, all too familiar from his own experiences, Ryder approached carefully and knelt beside her cot. "Ruby," he said softly, "you're dreaming." "You're safe." Slowly her eyes focused on his face. "Ryder," she murmured, using his given name for the first time. "I'm sorry I—" No need for apologies. He remained where he was, maintaining a respectful distance. "Bad dream." She nodded, pushing hair from her face with trembling hands. "I haven't had one in months. I thought they were gone." "They never really leave," Ryder said gently. "Just visit less frequently." Ruby drew a shaky breath. "It was about the fire, the one that killed my mother. I keep seeing her at the window, calling for help, and I can't reach her." The raw pain in her voice resonated with Ryder's own unhealed wounds. Without thinking, he took her hand, squeezing it gently. I dream about Antietam, he admitted. The men I couldn't save, the ones I had to put down when their wounds were too severe. Ruby's fingers tightened around his. How do you bear it? One day at a time, some better than others. He attempted a reassuring smile. Would you like some water, or I could stoke the fire? She shook her head. Just stay for a moment. Until I'm steady again. The request was innocent, simply a human being seeking comfort after distress. But as Ryder sat beside her cot, still holding her hand, he was acutely aware of Samuel sleeping nearby and the impropriety of the situation. More concerning was his own reaction, the powerful urge to protect Ruby, to somehow shield her from the pain of her memories. It was a dangerous feeling, one that threatened the careful distance he'd maintained from emotional entanglements. You should try to sleep, he said eventually, reluctantly releasing her hand. Morning comes early out here. Ruby nodded but caught his wrist as he stood. Thank you, she whispered. For understanding. Ryder returned to his borrowed room with his thoughts in turmoil. Something fundamental was shifting inside him, walls crumbling that he'd spent years reinforcing. The realization should have terrified him, but instead he felt an unfamiliar sense of possibility, as if a door long sealed had finally been unlocked. Morning revealed the storm's intensity. The creek beside the claim had swollen to a raging torrent that made immediate travel impossible. Samuel took the news with equanimity, assuring them the water would recede within a day. Gives me more time with my girl, he said cheerfully at breakfast, and you can help me assess that new vein, Fullerton. Always good to have another pair of eyes. Ryder found himself genuinely interested in the mining operation. Samuel had approached his claims systematically, using knowledge gained from books and careful observation rather than the haphazard methods employed by many prospectors. The results were promising, enough color in his samples to justify continued investment of time and resources. Not going to make me rich, Samuel acknowledged as they examined the exposed vein. But enough to live comfortably if it holds. More than most can say, Ryder observed. Most claims play out within months. That's because most men are looking for the quick strike. The miracle that lets them retire to San Francisco and live like kings. Samuel tapped the rock face with his crutch. I'm just looking for steady returns and the freedom to live as I choose. The philosophy appealed to Ryder, who had harbored similar modest ambitions for his own future. Not wealth but independence, the ability to determine his own path without answering to others. Your daughter worries about you out here alone, he ventured. Samuel sighed, leaning heavily on his crutches. I know, and I appreciate her concern. But Ruby has her own life to live, a bright future that shouldn't be tethered to an old man's folly. She doesn't see it as a folly, Ryder pointed out, or as a burden. No, Samuel agreed. That's the problem with loving someone. You want to spare them pain, but they insist on sharing it anyway. He gave Ryder a knowing look. You understand something about that, I think. Before Ryder could respond, Ruby appeared at the mine entrance carrying a basket. I thought you two might be hungry, she announced. Father, you shouldn't be on your feet so long. Samuel waved off her concern. Been sitting too much as it is. Feels good to be moving again. They ate a simple lunch of bread and cold meat under the trees near the claim, the conversation flowing easily between them. Watching Ruby and her father, Ryder was struck again by the natural affection between them, how they finished each other's sentences and referred to shared memories with the shorthand of long familiarity. The creek's going down, Ruby noted, pointing toward the water. We should be able to cross by morning. Ryder nodded, surprised to find himself reluctant at the prospect of returning to the ranch. These few days with the Ellsworths had awakened something in him that had been dormant since before the war, a sense of belonging, of being seen and accepted without pretense. That evening, as Samuel retired early, Ruby invited Ryder to join her on the small porch to watch the sunset. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky blazed with color, then faded to the deep blue of approaching night. I've been thinking about what you said, Ruby began, her voice soft in the gathering darkness, about building walls to protect yourself. Ryder tensed slightly, uncertain where the conversation was leading. And I wonder if those walls protect us from pain or just from living. She turned to face him, her features barely visible in the fading light. My mother used to say that a life without connection isn't really living at all, it's just existing. Some would say existing is enough, Ryder replied, though the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. Is it, for you? The directness of her question demanded equal honesty. It was. Until recently, he drew a deep breath, committing to a truth he could no longer deny. Until I met you. The admission hung between them, charged with implications neither was quite ready to voice aloud. Ruby's hand found his in the darkness, warm and certain. I should be returning to Boston soon, she said, the words clearly difficult for her. My father's healing. My teaching position starts again in the fall. Of course, Ryder replied automatically, even as disappointment surged through him. You have a life there. A half-life, she corrected softly, just as you have here. After a moment she added, unless something changed for either of us. The invitation in her words was unmistakable, yet terrifying in its potential. Ryder found himself at a crossroads he'd never anticipated, between the safety of isolation and the risk of opening himself to possibilities he'd long denied. Before he could respond, a shout from the direction of the creek shattered the moment. Ruby stood quickly, peering into the darkness. Hello, the camp, a male voice called. Samuel Ellsworth. That's Timothy Bradshaw, Ruby said, surprise evident in her voice. What's he doing here? Ryder followed her toward the creek, where 3 riders were visible in the moonlight, waiting on the far bank. Timothy sat astride a tall bay, flanked by 2 men Ryder recognized as hands from the Bradshaw ranch. Miss Ellsworth, Timothy called, doffing his hat. Your uncle sent us to escort you back, said the storm might have delayed you. Ruby frowned. That's very thoughtful, but Mr. Fullerton is already accompanying me. We plan to return tomorrow. Begging your pardon, ma'am, but Mr. Kincaid was most insistent. Timothy's gaze shifted to Ryder, a hint of challenge in his expression. Said he'd feel better knowing you had proper protection. The implication was clear. Kincaid no longer trusted Ryder alone with his niece. Had someone seen them talking at the gathering? Had Jenkins reported their conversation before departure? Whatever the cause, the message was unmistakable. Ryder's position at the Diamond K, his livelihood, depended on his discretion where Ruby was concerned. The creek's still high, Ryder called back. Better to wait until morning when it's safer to cross. We'll camp on this side tonight, Timothy replied smoothly. Be ready to escort Miss Ellsworth at first light. As the Bradshaw men dismounted and began setting up camp within view of the cabin, Ruby turned to Ryder, her expression troubled. This is ridiculous. Uncle Thomas knows I'm perfectly safe with you. Does he? Ryder countered quietly, or has someone suggested otherwise? Understanding dawned in her eyes. Timothy, she muttered, he must have said something after the gathering. But surely Uncle wouldn't believe. He's protecting you, Ruby, as any guardian would. Ryder managed a tight smile, and he's right to do so. I'm not. I don't have anything to offer someone like you. That's not true, she protested, reaching for his hand. You've shown me more honesty, more understanding in these few days than I've found in years of Boston society. Understanding doesn't put food on the table or a roof overhead. Ryder gently disengaged his hand from hers. Your uncle wants better for you. Timothy Bradshaw can provide the life you deserve. Hurt and anger flashed across Ruby's face. So you're deciding my future now, just like everyone else. I thought you were different. I am different, Ryder said softly. That's the problem. He turned away, unable to bear the disappointment in her eyes. I'll speak with your father, explain the situation. We should prepare for an early departure. As he walked toward the cabin, Ryder felt as though he was tearing out a part of himself, the part that had begun to hope for something beyond mere survival. But hope was a luxury he couldn't afford, not when Ruby's future and his own livelihood hung in the balance. Samuel took the news with a thoughtful expression, glancing between Ryder and his daughter. Seems Thomas is getting possessive in his old age, he observed, or perhaps young Bradshaw is getting impatient. What do you mean? Ruby asked, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. Only that Timothy's been paying court to you since you arrived in the territory, girl. Everyone knows it, Samuel sighed, and Thomas has always favored a match between you two. Consolidates the family holdings, keeps the bloodlines close. Ruby's expression hardened. I'm not a brood mare to be traded for land, father. Of course not, but you know how these things work. Thomas wants what he thinks is best for you, security, position. Samuel glanced at Ryder. No offense, young man. None taken, sir, Ryder replied, though the reality stung more than he cared to admit. That night sleep eluded him entirely. Ryder lay awake in Ruby's borrowed room, turning over possibilities in his mind. By dawn, he had reached a decision that felt simultaneously like surrender and liberation. When Timothy Bradshaw and his men arrived at the cabin after breakfast, Ryder had already saddled the horses and secured their packs. "Miss Ellsworth is ready to depart," he informed them formally. "I've discussed the matter with Mr. Samuel, and we agree it's best if I remain here to help with some repairs to the mining equipment." Timothy didn't bother to hide his satisfaction. Very sensible, Fullerton. "We'll see the lady safely home." Ruby emerged from the cabin, her expression carefully neutral as she embraced her father goodbye. When she turned to Ryder, however, her composure faltered. "Mr. Fullerton," she said stiffly. "Thank you for your escort." Miss Ellsworth, he tipped his hat, maintaining the formal distance she had established. "Safe travels." Only when she mounted her horse did their eyes truly meet. In that brief exchange, Ryder tried to convey everything he couldn't say aloud: his regret, his understanding of the impossible situation, and most dangerously, the feelings he had only begun to acknowledge. Something in Ruby's gaze softened, a silent communication that both soothed and wounded him. Then Timothy moved his horse alongside hers, breaking the connection, and the party set off toward the Diamond K. Samuel stood beside Ryder, watching until the riders disappeared from view. "That was a noble thing you just did," the older man observed. "Noble, but possibly foolish." Ryder sighed. "Had no choice, sir. Your daughter deserves better than a cowhand with nothing to his name." "Perhaps," Samuel turned to face him directly, "or perhaps what my daughter deserves is the right to choose for herself, rather than having men decide her fate for her." The rebuke, gentle as it was, struck home. Ryder had been so focused on what he lacked, property, prospects, position, that he'd failed to consider Ruby's agency in the matter. "It's complicated," he said finally. "Life generally is," Samuel agreed. "Especially when you're trying to protect your heart and someone else's at the same time." He clapped Ryder on the shoulder. "Now, since you're staying, you might as well make yourself useful. That sluice box won't repair itself." Over the next 3 days, Ryder threw himself into work at the claim, helping Samuel improve his operation and even discovering a promising new vein in the process. The physical labor kept his body exhausted, if not his mind, which continued to circle around thoughts of Ruby and what might have been. On the 4th day, as they sat eating lunch beside the creek, Samuel broke the companionable silence. "I've been thinking," he began, setting down his plate. "This claim's getting too big for one man, even when I'm fully healed. I could use a partner." Ryder looked up, startled. "Sir, you've got a good eye for the work, son. And you understand what I'm trying to build here, not a fortune, but a future." Samuel gestured to the surrounding land. "There's enough here for 2 men to live comfortably, maybe even prosper if that new vein pans out the way you think it might." "That's a generous offer," Ryder said carefully. "But why me? You hardly know me." Samuel's weathered face creased in a smile. "I know enough. I know you're honest, hardworking, and that you care enough about my daughter to put her interests before your own, even when it breaks your heart to do so." He paused. "And I know Ruby sees something in you worth fighting for, which carries significant weight in my estimation." Ryder stared at the older man, struggling to process the unexpected proposal. "Mr. Kincaid wouldn't approve." "Thomas doesn't own this claim, I do." Samuel's expression hardened slightly. "And while I respect my brother-in-law, I don't always agree with his views on what's best for Ruby or for anyone else." Even so, Ryder hesitated, torn between longing and practicality. "I don't have capital to invest." "Your labor is capital enough to start," Samuel countered. "We can work out the details over time." He studied Ryder thoughtfully. "Unless, of course, this is a polite way of declining." "If mining doesn't appeal to you." "It's not that," Ryder interrupted. "I've always wanted land of my own, something to build on. I just never thought that it might include more than just property," Samuel suggested gently. Ryder nodded, unable to voice the hope that had begun to take root, that this partnership might offer a path toward a future that could include Ruby, if she were willing. "I'd be honored to partner with you, Mr. Ellsworth," he said finally. "If you're certain." "Samuel, please," the older man extended his hand. "And I've never been more certain of anything in my life," except perhaps that my daughter is going to give us both an earful when she finds out we've been planning her future without consulting her." The irony drew a reluctant laugh from Ryder. "I suspect you're right about that." As they shook hands, sealing their agreement, Ryder felt something shift inside him, as if a door long closed had finally swung open, revealing possibilities he had never allowed himself to imagine. The following week passed in a blur of activity as Ryder and Samuel formalized their partnership and expanded operations at the claim. Word was sent to the Diamond K requesting Ryder's personal effects and final wages, with a brief explanation of his new arrangement. The response came not from Jenkins but from Kincaid himself, a terse note acknowledging Ryder's departure and wishing him well in his new endeavor. Of Ruby, there was no mention, though Samuel received a separate letter that he read with a troubled expression. "Thomas has arranged a dinner party next Saturday," he informed Ryder, specifically to announce Ruby's engagement to Timothy Bradshaw. Ryder felt as though he'd been struck. "So soon?" "Too soon, if you ask me." Samuel folded the letter carefully, but Thomas can be persuasive when he sets his mind to something. "And Ruby, has she agreed?" Samuel's expression softened. "The letter doesn't say. But I know my daughter. She wouldn't agree to such an arrangement unless she believed she had no choice." The implication hung between them, that Ruby might have accepted Timothy's proposal, believing Ryder had abandoned her, had chosen the solitary life over the possibility of a future together. "I should go to her," Ryder said suddenly. "Explain." "Our partnership," Samuel raised an eyebrow, "or your feelings?" "Both," Ryder stood, decision crystallizing with unexpected clarity. "If she still chooses Bradshaw afterward, I'll accept it, but she deserves to make that choice with all the facts before her." Samuel nodded slowly. "Then you'd better clean yourself up and borrow my good horse. It's a long ride to the Diamond K, and that dinner party is only 3 days away." The journey back to the ranch seemed both endless and too brief. Endless in the physical strain of riding hard for 2 days, too brief in the time it afforded Ryder to prepare what he would say to Ruby. How could he explain his abrupt departure, his partnership with her father, his newfound hope for a future that might include her? By the time the Diamond K came into view, late on the second day, Ryder had rehearsed and discarded a dozen speeches. None seemed adequate to convey the transformation he had undergone, from a man determined to remain alone to one willing to risk everything for the chance at connection. As he approached the ranch, a flurry of activity near the main house caught his attention. Wagons and saddled horses filled the yard, and light spilled from every window. With a jolt, Ryder realized the dinner party must be underway already. He had miscalculated the date. Hesitation gripped him as he dismounted at the stables. To interrupt such an event would create a scene, embarrass Ruby, and possibly anger Kincaid beyond reconciliation. Yet to wait until morning might mean losing his chance forever. "Fullerton," Jenkins emerged from the shadows, surprise evident in his voice. "What in blazes are you doing here?" "I need to speak with Miss Ellsworth," Ryder replied, straightening his travel-worn clothes. "It's important." The foreman's expression hardened. "You've got some nerve, boy. After abandoning your post without proper notice, you think you can just ride in and demand to see the boss's niece." "I sent a letter explaining." "I know what you sent. Doesn't change the fact that you left when we needed hands for the fall roundup." Jenkins shook his head. "Besides, you're too late. They're announcing the engagement tonight." The confirmation hit Ryder like a physical blow. She's agreed to marry Bradshaw. Something in his voice must have conveyed his devastation, for Jenkins's expression softened slightly. "Look, I don't know all the particulars, but I do know Miss Ruby hasn't been herself since you stayed at her father's claim. Goes around looking like she's lost something precious." The foreman sighed. "Kincaid thinks the engagement will snap her out of it. I think he's wrong, but it's not my place to say so." Hope flickered within Ryder. If Ruby was unhappy about the engagement, perhaps all was not yet lost. "I have to try, Jenkins, even if she sends me away afterward." The foreman studied him for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Go around to the kitchen. Mrs. Harris will let you in the back way." "But Fullerton," he gripped Ryder's arm, "if you cause a scene that embarrasses that young lady, I'll personally ensure you regret it." "Understood," Ryder assured him, "and thank you." The kitchen was a hive of activity, with Mrs. Harris directing a small army of helpers preparing elaborate dishes for the gathering. She paused in her work when Ryder appeared in the doorway, recognition, and then surprise crossing her face. Mr. Fullerton. What on earth? I need to speak with Miss Ruby, he interrupted quietly. It's urgent. The cook's expression softened. Poor child could use a friendly face. She's been like a ghost these past weeks. Mrs. Harris wiped her hands on her apron. Decision made. Wait here. She disappeared through the swinging door that led to the dining room, returning moments later with a concerned expression. They're about to make the announcement, she whispered. Mr. Kincaid's already called for attention. If you're going to do something, it has to be now. Heart pounding, Ryder nodded. Which door leads to the dining room? Message. Harris pointed, then caught his arm as he moved toward it. She deserves happiness, Mr. Fullerton, whatever that looks like. Taking a deep breath, Ryder pushed through the door into a room filled with Montana Territory's most prominent citizens. Conversation faltered as heads turned toward the unexpected intrusion. At the head of the long table, Thomas Kincaid stood with a glass raised, his expression changing from surprise to anger as he recognized the interloper. Fullerton. What is the meaning of this? He demanded, setting down his glass with enough force to slosh wine onto the white tablecloth. Ryder's gaze moved past him to Ruby, seated at Kincaid's right with Timothy Bradshaw beside her. She wore a dress of pale green that accentuated the chestnut tones of her hair, but her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock at his appearance. I apologize for the interruption, Ryder began, his voice steady despite the thundering of his heart. But I couldn't let this evening proceed without speaking my piece. Murmurs rippled through the assembled guests. Timothy Bradshaw rose to his feet, hand moving instinctively toward where a gun would normally rest. This is outrageous, he declared. Kincaid, have this man removed at once. Ryder ignored him, focusing solely on Ruby. Miss Ellsworth, I left your father's claim not because I wanted to, but because I believed it was what was best for you. I was wrong. Ruby stood slowly, her expression unreadable. Mr. Fullerton. Please let me finish. Ryder took a step forward, aware of Kincaid signaling to a ranch hand near the door. I've spent years believing that connections were weaknesses, that being alone was the only way to survive out here. Meeting you changed everything. The room had gone utterly silent, all eyes moving between Ryder and Ruby as the drama unfolded. Your father offered me a partnership in his claim, Ryder continued. I accepted because for the first time I could see a future beyond mere survival, a future that includes a home, purpose, and, he swallowed hard, the possibility of love. Timothy moved to stand beside Ruby, possessively placing a hand on her arm. This is inappropriate. Miss Ellsworth is spoken for. Ruby gently but firmly removed his hand. I believe Mr. Fullerton is speaking to me, Timothy. Her voice was quiet but carried clearly across the hushed room. Encouraged by her response, Ryder pressed on. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. I'm just a cowhand who got lucky enough to find gold of a different sort. But before you commit yourself to another, I needed you to know that his voice caught, that I love you, Ruby Ellsworth. And if there's any chance that you might feel something similar, I'm asking you to consider a different path. Kincaid stepped forward, face flushed with anger. This has gone far enough, Jenkins, he called to the foreman who had appeared in the doorway. Remove this man immediately. Ruby's voice cut through the tension like a knife. No, the simple words, spoken with quiet authority, halted everyone in their tracks. She moved around the table toward Ryder, ignoring her uncle's protest. You left without saying goodbye, she said, stopping just out of reach. You made a decision about what was best for me without consulting me. I was wrong, Ryder admitted, acutely aware of their audience but focused solely on Ruby. I thought I was protecting you, but really I was protecting myself, from hope, from the possibility of rejection, from feeling anything too deeply. Her expression softened slightly. And now I'm terrified, he confessed with a half-smile, but standing here anyway because some things are worth the risk. The silence stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then to Ryder's astonishment, Ruby laughed, a bright, clear sound that seemed to release the tension in the room. Well, Uncle Thomas, she said, turning to face Kincaid, it seems your dinner party will have to serve a different purpose than you planned. Kincaid's face darkened. Ruby, consider what you're doing. Bradshaw can offer you security, position. But not love, she countered gently, and not the freedom to choose my own path. She glanced at Timothy. I'm sorry if I've led you to believe otherwise, but I cannot marry you. Timothy's expression hardened, but he managed a stiff nod. I see, perhaps it's best if my family and I withdraw. He looked pointedly at Ryder. I hope you realize what you're throwing away, Miss Ellsworth. As the Bradshaws and several other uncomfortable guests made their excuses and departed, Kincaid approached Ruby and Ryder, his anger somewhat tempered by resignation. You're making a mistake, he told his niece, though without his earlier heat. Your father may have found color in that claim, but it's nothing compared to what Bradshaw could provide. Ruby took Ryder's hand, the simple gesture more binding than any formal agreement. I don't need riches, uncle, just enough to build a life with someone who sees me as I truly am. Kincaid shook his head, then surprised them both by offering his hand to Ryder. If you hurt her, Fullerton, there's nowhere in this territory you can hide from me. Understood? Yes, sir, Ryder accepted the handshake, recognizing it as both warning and reluctant blessing. You have my word. Later, as the remaining guests gossiped excitedly about the evening's dramatic turn, Ruby led Ryder onto the porch, away from curious eyes. You know they'll talk about this for years, she observed, leaning against the railing. The cowboy who interrupted an engagement dinner to declare his love. Ryder winced slightly, not exactly how I planned it. How did you plan it? With more privacy and fewer wealthy ranchers glaring at me, he smiled, taking her hands in his. But I meant every word, Ruby. I love you. I think I have since that first night at the way station, when you handed me coffee and looked at me like you could see right through all my defenses. I could, she replied softly, because I recognized myself in you, someone trying so hard to be strong that they'd forgotten what strength really means. Ryder drew her closer, his voice low. And what does it mean? Having the courage to be vulnerable, Ruby answered, lifting her face to his. To risk everything for the chance at happiness. When their lips finally met, it felt to Ryder like the culmination of a journey he hadn't even known he was on, from isolation to connection, from survival to truly living. Ruby's arms wound around his neck, her body fitting against his as though made to be there. So, he murmured when they finally parted, will you come see the claim? Your father and I have made some improvements. There's even a proper cabin now, with glass windows. Ruby smiled, her eyes bright with joy and unshed tears. Is that a proposal, Mr. Fullerton? Not yet, Ryder brushed a strand of hair from her face, marveling that he was free to do so. When I propose, you'll know it. There will be a ring and possibly fewer interruptions. I look forward to it. She leaned her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. In the meantime, yes, I'd very much like to see this claim that's apparently worth giving up a life of luxury with Timothy Bradshaw. Ryder laughed, the sound unfamiliar but welcome. It's not much to look at yet, but it has potential. Rather like a certain cowboy you might know. I prefer to think of him as a miner now, Ruby countered with a teasing smile, one who finally discovered that the richest veins aren't found in the ground, but in the heart. As they stood together under the vast Montana sky, Ryder felt the last of his walls crumble. The frontier hadn't changed, it remained as beautiful and dangerous as ever. But his understanding of how to survive it had transformed completely. True strength wasn't found in isolation, but in the courage to open oneself to connection, to vulnerability, to love. For the first time since the war, Ryder Fullerton looked toward the future not with dread or resignation, but with hope, and with the woman who had taught him that even in the Wild West, tender hearts could not only survive but flourish.